And thanks for joining us for WNY News Now as we continue to cover election 2022, bringing you directly with candidates. Joining us in studio today is State Senator George Borrello, who's running for a redistricted state Senate seat here. Senator Borrello, thank you very much for coming in.
It's good to be back with you in person, as a matter of fact.
Yes, absolutely. We talk many occasions on Zoom,
Yeah.
so it's good to have you here in Jamestown. First, I know that a lot of our viewers know you. You've been Chautauqua County Executive, a longtime legislator before that. But can you tell us a little bit about George Borrello if, say, somebody is just entering the political arena?
Well, I was born and raised here in Chautauqua County in Fredonia and Silver Creek. I started my own business when I was in my early 20s, grew that business into a successful nationally recognized company. And I really spent most of my adult life as a business owner, and in fact still am. My wife Kelly and I are in the restaurant business. We own businesses in Sunset Bay on Lake Erie in beautiful northern Chautauqua County. We have a restaurant called the Cabana Sam's. We have the Sunset Bay Beach Club. We have Sunset Bay Beach. And we employ quite a few people. So for me, getting into the elected official arena was about what could I do to ensure that our area can prosper and that our voice is heard, which is why I first ran for county legislator, which was a part-time position, and then moved on to a full-time position of county executive and now the state senate. So for me, it's all about advocating for what's best for our region, and I truly enjoy representing us and being that voice in Albany now.
Yeah, I know having successful business is such an important aspect of our economy, not just in New York State, but across the nation and the world. It leads to tax dollars, which makes the whole system run. And during the pandemic, so many businesses struggled, and even to this day haven't reopened because of the various factors that are in place. For you as state senator, how do you assess how that has gone, and where are we now, do you feel?
Well, unfortunately, New York State lags behind almost every other state in recovery from the pandemic, and largely due because the policies that were in place during the pandemic and the height of the pandemic were so restrictive. We had a state legislature that was very comfortable ceding all of their power to Andrew Cuomo. And despite multiple attempts by myself and others to take away those emergency powers, they were met with failure, unfortunately, because our colleagues, the majority of our colleagues, our Democrat colleagues, decided that they were very comfortable letting one person run the show. And on top of that, we look at New York State right now and where we stand. It's the most unfriendly place in the nation to do business, the most expensive place to live, the most oppressive regulations and laws, and that has really caused the flight of New Yorkers. People are, as they say, voting with their feet. They are leaving New York State in record numbers. In fact, New York State once again has led the nation in what they call outmigration, people moving away. We're losing approximately 1,000 people a day here in New York State. So you can argue whether on the merits of some of these changes, things like the bail reform laws that have made New York State far more dangerous. You can argue the merits of the increases in social welfare programs. But in the end, New Yorkers are in record numbers choosing to leave the state. And that's really the thing that we need to stand up and push back against. We need to really convince people, in Albany especially, that what they do is harmful and that we have to stop and reverse that trend if we want to make New York State prosperous and viable.
I want to get to that bail reform in just a moment. I know that you've been in the news lately as the push to repeal, and for many of your Democratic colleagues, it's now the push to reform. Hopefully gets underway is your push and your petition. But as for that flock, that migration, is there anything at the state Senate level that you can do to try to address that? I know being in the Republican minority has made it difficult for many bills to try to get forward.
Well, really what we've done is we are advocates for common sense as Republican members. We've been able to have positive influence on things. We've been able to get bills changed, whether something that was truly radical ended up getting changed before it was sent to the governor's desk, or it died altogether. So our job, our mission really, is to debate these bills, to point out the flaws and to ensure that the sponsors of these bills, who often have no idea what's in these bills, they were handed to them by radical special interest groups, understand the consequences of this bill becoming a law. And we've been effective in that in many ways. However, we are inundated with really day after day with new laws that really strip away the freedoms of New Yorkers. So we will continue to fight back, but the ultimate goal is to return balance to state government, and that means whether it's the New York State Senate going back to being majority Republican, whether it's electing a Republican governor. I don't care if you're Republican, Democrat, Independent, Conservative, you should want some kind of balance, because what one party rule has brought us is this chaos that we're seeing now. High costs, dangerous streets in a very short period of time, and this was certainly exacerbated by the pandemic. New York State has just become a more violent place, a more expensive place, and in the end, a place where people are leaving.
Yeah, and I know that the expensive side of things, people are feeling it right now at the gas pumps and at the grocery stores as they see that their grocery bill continues to rise. There are many factors in play, many of which the national government has tried to address. We spoke to that in some of our interviews with candidates running for Congress. But at the state level, what do you feel could be the best move that you would fight for to try to restore some of this this out of control inflation that we're seeing?
Well, I've been an advocate for suspending the gasoline tax. Keep in mind that it's not just about putting gas in your car. It's about putting gas in trucks and farm equipment and everything else. It has a cascading negative effect on exacerbating inflation. We've also done tremendous harm to our agriculture industry, and what that means is we now have to bring products in from other states and other countries to just meet our basic food needs in New York State. We need to strengthen agriculture. I'm very proud of having championed the Nourish New York program, which is now law, which has been a huge help. It was one of the #1 priorities for the New York Farm Bureau to get that done, and we got it done. And did so, by the way, in a bipartisan manner. So we have to continue to do things to make it just less costly for people to live and work and raise a family in New York State. And what that really means is that my colleagues, the folks that went from being community activists to being members of the state legislature, who've really never had skin in the game in our economy, have to understand basic economics, which more often than not they do not understand basic economics, and number two, have that experience, that level of experience, whether it was as a business owner, a manager, a person just participating in our economy in some way before becoming a member of the state legislature. And unfortunately, so many of my colleagues sadly don't have that experience, and that's why New York State has become the least affordable place in the nation to live.
Yeah. That gas tax, I want to revisit that, because
Sure.
I know that's been a topic at the national level and other states as well. What would that look like in your eyes, and how soon maybe there might be traction?
Well, I will say that we've been talking about this for quite a while, and in the Senate One House, which is the Senate's version of the budget, before we go into final negotiations between the Assembly, the Senate, and the governor, they have proposed a modest gas tax holiday that's going to account, I think, only to about 17 cents. But the total amount of taxes, I should say, per gallon is 48 cents. And we should suspend all of that. And not only will that be immediate relief to everyone, including the cost of transporting goods around our state, it also will be, I think, the states participating in the pain, if you will, because the state will lose that lucrative gas tax, and it hopefully will inspire my colleagues and the governor to have more common sense approach to our energy policy, because our energy policy in New York State is dysfunctional, it's disjointed, and it's a big reason why we're seeing energy costs higher here in New York State than the average in the nation.
Yeah, and this is a good segue to talking about energy. I know there is a huge push underway in New York right now with trying to invest in green energy. We've seen it here in Chautauqua County with windmills in the town of Arkwright. Residents there have spoke out against it, many of them saying it's a nuisance, it's causing environmental problems. Governor Cuomo, before he left office, former Governor Cuomo, he had this push where he wanted to bring the windmills to Lake Erie.
Yeah, it's a terrible idea.
For you, how do we go about keeping in mind of our climate and in our ever-changing world, but at the same time we need energy to go to work, go to school, live?
We need a common sense approach to any kind of a transition, number one, and we don't have that. We used to have the idea that we were going to use natural gas as a bridge fuel as we transition to renewable energy. That was taken off the table by Andrew Cuomo, and in fact we shut down the Dunkirk NRG plant, which was not only the largest taxpayer in Chautauqua County, but also made us energy independent. And what people have to understand is this is nothing but a political shell game. First and foremost, New York State only accounts for 0.4% of the total greenhouse gas emissions in the world. So even if we devastated our economy and got down to zero, it would have no impact on climate change. But what's worse is this is truly just pretending we're doing something about it, because what we are doing now is we are importing more power into New York State than we ever have before. In fact, about 25% of Western New York's power now comes from the dirtiest old-fashioned coal plants in places like Homer City, Pennsylvania. So if this is truly about global climate change, the fact that instead of producing it here in New York State, and we're producing it in Pennsylvania or Ohio, not only does it not do anything to help greenhouse gas emissions, we are actually harming it. We're making things worse with this politically driven, bogus energy agenda. If we had repowered the NRG plant with natural gas, it would have a much smaller carbon footprint than importing power from dirty old-fashioned coal plants, which is what we're doing now. Additionally, New York State does not recognize hydropower as a renewable energy, which is ridiculous, because New York State is the third largest producer of hydroelectric power in the nation. And not only do we have one of the largest hydroelectric plants in the Niagara Power Project, which provides low-cost, affordable, clean, renewable energy power, we have the opportunity to convert a lot of dams and reservoirs that are, in most cases, in severe disrepair, getting those converted into small hydroelectric plants that could actually power the communities in our area without putting as much strain on the grid. And I did an op-ed about this that was published in the Buffalo News, talking about common sense ways for us to address a cleaner, better energy portfolio. But unfortunately, that's not the agenda. The agenda from the other side of the aisle is to truly damage our economy. And again, converting in a very short period of time to all electric is not going to do a thing to help greenhouse gas emissions. In fact, it is going to make things worse, because not only are we importing power that we will have to continue to not only import but ramp up, you have to understand the environmental impact of building and transporting and constructing all of these wind turbines and solar panels. These are made from non-renewable energy, non-renewable sources that require a tremendous amount of fossil fuel. Most of them come from foreign countries like China, where these items are produced under horrible environmental and human conditions, where you have child labor producing these things. So in the end, this is all for show. And this is all so that people like Andrew Cuomo and now Governor Hochul can pretend that they're doing something about climate change.
And I know we've talked before in Albany about the culture of Albany, and how in many cases it is one-party rule, where Republicans don't have much of a say. They did in previous administrations, and who knows what the fall election might bring. With that said, is that the barrier for conversations like this to take place? What would be getting in the way? Because we have these issues, and yes, we're coming off of a pandemic where public health was at the forefront, and now we're focused so much on gas prices and consumer and things abroad, but we're still having these problems that have been going on for decades.
Well, this is what I say to folks. I come from a family of Democrats, okay? My parents, my grandparents were Democrats. This is not, what you see in New York State, this is not the Democratic Party of my parents and grandparents. It has been commandeered by a far left agenda. And unfortunately, the working class Democrats, people like my parents, they're not on board with this stuff. And so I don't care if you're a Republican, a Democrat, a conservative, a liberal, even if you're someone who is just not affiliated at all. You should be concerned about the fact that one-party rule has really sent us on a runaway train of irresponsible policies that have damaged our state. So I would appeal to those folks that regardless of your party affiliation or your political philosophies, to understand that having balance in our state government is probably the most important and significant way that we can stop the damaging policies that we're experiencing currently.
And that balance, I think, is what a lot of people have been talking about,
Yes.
Especially with the 2016 election and then in 2020. A lot of folks maybe are tuning out politics and they don't want to get involved because when you walk into a room, in many cases, they ask you, the first question is, what party are you from? I've had this personally, and they refuse to even debate or to talk about it or to agree that you might disagree.
Yeah.
How much of a challenge is it, or maybe not, when you're talking to people out there who are trying to get involved with the process, but in a world where everyone's so volatile? Well,
this is truly, it's an excellent observation. We have probably more divided than we've been in my lifetime, but we have lost the art of agreeing to disagree. It used to be that the United States was the place where, number one, the politics ended at the water's edge, and at the end of the day, we were all Americans. We all bleed red. And now we've gotten to the point where either you agree with me 100% or you're my sworn enemy, and that's something you see in third world countries. That I'm going to take up arms against you because we don't believe exactly the same things. We have to get back to that. We really do. But the bottom line is that the only way that's going to happen is to restore that type of balance. That we need to have both sides involved in the conversation. One of the most damaging things that happens in Albany is that a piece of legislation like the Climate and Community Protection Act, the climate change legislation, this was written by far left environmentalists. It didn't include any stakeholders, whether they might be people in the energy industry, people that were concerned about the impact on our environment and ecology, common sense folks, a broad spectrum. That didn't occur. It was written by radicals, handed to the leadership of the Democratic Party, and word for word became the legislation that we now have. Legislation that means that in less than 2 years, you will no longer be able to build a house that's powered with natural gas. In less than 2 years, you're going to have the cost of just owning a home skyrocket. These are all things that people are not aware are coming because, quite frankly, it was hidden from the public. But it was to satisfy radical special interests, people that really just have no stake in this, people that don't live in rural communities like ours, where you're powered by natural gas and propane, where you have to drive a car to work, and because you don't have a subway or a city bus. None of those factors were considered, and it was a one-size-fits-all policy. And probably the most egregious part of this is the fact that upstate New York in general, we are largely green. 88% of our energy portfolio in New York State is renewable energy when you count hydroelectric power. It's downstate, it's New York City, that is only 30% renewable. We're not the problem. So to impose their will and their radical agenda on the rest of us is really the part that I'm most concerned with and most vocal about.
And we've seen a lot of folks on both sides of the aisle just in the last month or so speaking out against the bail reform measures here in the state, which were, from my perspective as a reporter, another one of those times where we didn't get to see the full context of what was happening until it was already passed and then took effect. Just this week here locally, we've seen a crime take place against a child where the person walks free because of bail reform.
Yes.
You've been an outspoken opponent against it. You've put together measures to try to get traction to repeal, and you've talked with Democratic colleagues about reforming it. Where do we stand now, and where does that fight go from this point if you're reelected this fall?
It's going to have to take a grassroots effort from everyone in New York State who understands that New York State is a much more violent place, because the folks that presented bail reform have said that they are not making any changes. Even Governor Hochul leaked information yesterday on her plan to use the budget process to implement some bail reform measures. But she's already been told those things are going to be dead on arrival. And here's what I will say to you. Yes, many of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle are talking about bail reform being changed. but they're not taking action. And I can tell you that because I myself have led what are called hostile amendments on the floor of the state Senate to repeal bail reform. And when we do that, every single Democrat votes no. So I hate to make this about a Republican versus Democrat, but you have to understand, the hypocrisy that's going on, because my colleagues on the other side of the aisle will get in front of a camera or get on social media and say we need to make changes. But in Albany, where their job is actually done to actually vote on those pieces of legislation that would repeal bail reform, they all vote no.
Where does the buck stop then?
Well, the buck stops with the people of New York State that have to set aside their, I would say, blind faith partisan view and say, what's going to be in my best interest of myself and my family. And in fact, I just said to a group of business owners earlier today where a guest speaker on a presentation, I said, even if that means holding your nose and voting for a Republican, understanding that balance is more important, and public safety should be number one.
Yeah, and I know that that is hitting home for so many people. There are so many things that it seems like are coming to a head this spring. Tensions, gas, bail reform. For you in Albany, what do you think the biggest issue that New York is going to face in the next year?
The fact that we are at the very bottom of all the states when it comes to our economic recovery from COVID. That still right now in New York State, people can quit their job and collect unemployment, which is the last state in the nation for that to be able to do so. You can still claim that you fear catching COVID as a reason to quit your job and collect unemployment. The fact that we have not addressed the unemployment insurance deficit that we have, $9.3 billion. 32 other states have committed some of their federal funding to filling that hole, and New York State has not. And ultimately that we are pushing ourselves, I would say, towards a more socialist style of government. And that sounds good to some people, except looking at where we are right now, this is the path to a more socialist form of government. And you can look at the pain that we are experiencing. Supply chain shortages, workforce issues, inflation, this whole idea that there are folks out there who believe that no one should be in jail ever for anything. And those are the folks that have led the fight to keep bail reform just like it is, an utter disaster. So it is truly a crossroads. This election upcoming is probably the most significant in New York State in my lifetime, if not ever.
In our final moments that we have together, what would be your message to a potential voter, a viewer, a constituent? I know you are in a new redistricted zone slightly because of that process. It looks like, regardless of legal attempts, that will hold. So maybe petitioning to a new audience. What would you want them to take away?
What I would say is, as I said before, there are many folks that are registered Democrat, Republican, whatever. They're just common sense folks that want to go to work every day, provide for their families, and make sure that their children and grandchildren have a better life. If that's your goal, and your goal is not to just pack up and move out, then you need to really fundamentally reassess who is in office here in New York State. And you need to look at it from a standpoint of what's in the best interest of my family and our future here. And I would ask you to vote accordingly because, quite frankly, going down the same road we've gone down for the last 3 years has been incredibly damaging for New York State. I've been a vocal opponent of these irresponsible changes, and I would say that I cannot be that lone voice in Albany. I need more colleagues that think like me, common sense, and ultimately the people of New York State, the everyday people, have to step up and say enough is enough.
So is this beyond your district then, it seems like? You need support.
It absolutely is. In fact, I speak, as the ranking member of the Agriculture Committee, I go all over the state and speak with people. As a leader in our Republican conference, I speak out. I speak out to organizations all the time, and I say, you need to pay attention to what's going on. You need to pay attention to what organizations you belong to. Everybody belongs to some kind of an organization. I don't care if it's something that you do as a hobby or it's your profession. You're a realtor, you're a restaurateur, you own some kind of a business that has a statewide organization. Find out who your organization is supporting. If you're a member of a union, find out who your union is supporting and speak out and tell them that you can no longer support them if they're going to continue to support people that are ultimately damaging you and your family and the state of New York.
All right. State Senator George Borrello joining us today as we spotlight candidates running for office. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
And again, for more election coverage, head on over to WNYNewsNow.com. Check it out on our free mobile app and channel 716 on Roku.